Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to Dave's Spooky Stories. I'm your host, Dave. Tonight I'm excited to have a collection of Glitch in the Matrix stories. Please like and subscribe. Leave your comments below. And here's the first story. Story number 1. Dogs being dogs. It was just another trip to the dog park. I grabbed my keys and clipped the leash onto Daisy's collar. She wagged her tail furiously, her whole body vibrating with excitement. Daisy's a mutt, part retriever, part something scrappy. She's the kind of dog that loves everyone and everything, and I'll admit, her enthusiasm is contagious. I figured we'd spend an hour at the park, let her burn off some energy, and head home. Nothing unusual. But when we arrived, I felt the oddness before I even stepped inside. The park was quiet. Not silent, but quiet in a way that didn't make sense. The dogs were running and moving, their owners standing in clusters as usual, but something was missing. No laughter, no yelling, no chaotic barking echoing off the trees. Just the faint sounds of paws hitting the dirt and the rustle of leaves in the wind. Daisy was practically dragging me toward the gate, oblivious to my hesitation. I unclipped her leash and she bolted toward the closest group of dogs, a sleek black lab, a German shepherd, and a scruffy terrier. I watched her approach them, her usual bravado tempered by cautious tail wags. The 3 dogs turned toward her in unison, their eyes fixed on her with eerie focus. Daisy slowed, hesitated, and stopped short. For a second, she seemed almost unsure, like she wandered into something bigger than herself. "They're just dogs being dogs," a voice said behind me. I turned to see a woman leaning against the fence, her arms crossed. Her tone was flat, as if dismissing something more profound. "They're just dogs being dogs." "Yeah, I guess," I said, laughing nervously. But the words didn't sit right with me. Something about the way the dogs were moving. It wasn't random, wasn't chaotic like it should have been. They were forming loose clusters, dispersing and regrouping with a precision that made my stomach knot. Daisy started trotting toward another group, her tail wagging weakly. The German shepherd was still watching her, though now it had joined a line of dogs pacing steadily along the edge of the park as if patrolling. I called Daisy's name, but she didn't even glance back. "It's just dogs being dogs," said another voice, this time from a man standing nearby. He was older, wiry, holding an empty leash. His dog, a golden retriever, was circling a group of smaller dogs like it was guiding them. "They got their own rhythm here," he added, though his words carried no real conviction. I tried to reply, but my voice caught in my throat. The man turned back to watch the retriever, his gaze distant. I scanned the park, trying to figure out what felt so wrong. The people, usually loud and animated, were strangely subdued. Their gestures stiff, mechanical. And the dogs, they weren't barking, not one bark. The more I watched, the stranger it became. The dogs weren't playing, they were organizing. Clusters formed and dissolved. Circles tightened and spread out. And movements happened with a purpose I couldn't quite grasp. Daisy was in the middle of it now, moving with them, almost like she'd been folded into their rhythm. I walked toward the fence, feeling uneasy. A third person, a young man sitting on the ground with his back to the fence, looked up at me. "It's just dogs being dogs," he said, his voice low and detached, his words repeated like an echo. "Dogs being dogs," turning my unease into something heavier. I opened the gate and stepped inside. As soon as I did, everything shifted. The dogs paused for a heartbeat, turning their heads in my direction, almost as if acknowledging me. Their movements resumed, but slower now, more deliberate. Daisy saw me and stopped, her gaze flickering toward the shepherd, then back at me. Her tail didn't wag. I crouched down and called her, my voice shaking more than I cared to admit. "Daisy, come here." She didn't move, just stared at me with wide eyes, her body tense. "They're just dogs being dogs," the young man repeated from behind me. His tone hadn't changed, but his words lingered in the air, heavy with something unspoken. The dogs started to move again, but not toward each other, toward me. Slowly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. They formed a loose semicircle, their eyes locked on mine. I backed up, my legs shaky, and glanced over my shoulder at the people outside the fence. None of them seemed alarmed. They just stood there, motionless, their faces neutral, watching. "Daisy!" I called again, louder this time. Finally she responded and trotted toward me, her movements hesitant. I clipped her leash back on, my hands trembling, and backed out of the park. As soon as we passed through the gate, the dogs stopped moving. Every single one turned its head in our direction, their gazes sharp and unwavering. The people didn't react. Their bodies remained frozen, their faces neutral, as though they hadn't noticed a thing. The young man who'd spoken earlier looked at me briefly, his expression unreadable. "See? Just dogs being dogs." I didn't reply. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow as I hurried toward the car, Daisy trotting beside me without a sound. I didn't look back. When we got home, Daisy didn't act like herself. She lay in her bed, staring at the wall. She didn't wag her tail when I spoke to her, or offer her usual paw when I sat next to her. She was alert, her ears pricked, but her focus was somewhere I couldn't follow. I sat beside her, whispering, "What happened out there?" But she didn't move. She just kept staring ahead, her ears tense, listening to something I couldn't hear. I haven't gone back to the park. I don't know if I ever will. But late at night, when the apartment is silent, Daisy still pricks her ears. She tilts her head toward the door, as though waiting for something or someone to arrive. And all I can think about is that phrase. It's just dogs being dogs. Story number 2. Follow the route. The highway stretched ahead, straight as an arrow, slicing through the vast expanse of South Dakota. It was the kind of road where time seemed to lose its grip, each mile bleeding into the next. The landscape was unchanging, fields of grass swaying in the breeze, and the occasional rust-red barn leaning against the horizon. Gravel roads branching off at perfect intervals like the spines of a fish. I'd been driving for hours, the monotonous rhythm of the tires against the asphalt lulling me into a daze. The radio had long since surrendered to static, its hissing a constant companion. I tried scanning for a station, any station, but the dial offered nothing but whispers and crackles. My GPS was equally unhelpful. Its voice, calm, detached, kept repeating the same phrase. Follow the route. No street names, no landmarks. Just those 3 words delivered in a tone that sent a shiver down my spine. Follow the route. It was the gravel roads that finally broke the spell. Each one seemed identical, evenly spaced like teeth in a comb, and their mystery was irresistible. Where did they lead? What was out there beyond the highway's relentless sameness? On a whim, I turned down one, the tires crunching against the gravel. The GPS chimed in immediately, its dead voice saying, "Recalculating, follow the route." The road stretched on, winding slightly but never deviating far from straight. The fields on either side gave way to clusters of skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the sky. I passed an old farmhouse, its windows staring blankly, and a windmill creaking with the effort of turning. The scenery was different, but still carried the same oppressive sameness, as though the road was folding in on itself. Minutes turned to hours, and the gravel road kept going. I was certain I should have reached something by now, a town, a junction, even a dead end. But there was nothing, just the same trees, the same fields, the same barns that looked eerily similar to the ones I'd passed before. The GPS kept murmuring its directive, "Follow the route." Eventually I reached a split in the road, a choice between left and right. The GPS didn't seem to care. It had fallen silent, its screen displaying a vague line that might as well have been a scribble. I chose left, the decision feeling meaningless, and drove on. The road dipped and rose, twisting ever so slightly, but the landmarks were familiar, too familiar. Another barn, another windmill, another skeletal tree. And then it hit me. I'd been here before. Not just once, but countless times. The road had looped back on itself, disguising its repetition with minor variations. When I finally emerged from the gravel road, my heart sank. The highway stretched before me, identical to the spot where I'd exited. The same brittle grass, the same rust-red barn, the same unyielding stretch of asphalt leading nowhere. My car's radio crackled to life, static filling the cabin like an unwelcome guest. And then, buried in the static, I thought I heard a voice, faint, almost imperceptible. It said, "Follow the route." I stared at the highway for what felt like an eternity, dread pulling in my chest. The road was infinite, an endless loop that swallowed everything. I glanced at the GPS, its screen frozen, the phrase, "Follow the route," glowing in ghostly white letters. There was no escape. Not down the gravel roads, not ahead, not behind. With trembling hands, I gripped the wheel and drove on, the tires rolling forward into the same endless stretch of asphalt. As the miles blurred, something shifted. In the corner of my eye, I turned sharply, catching sight of a bird swooping low across the highway. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing, but its presence sent a jolt through me. For hours I hadn't seen any animals, not even insects. The sight of a bird was a crack in the facade. Then the radio crackled again, not static this time, but music. Faint at first, like a distant whisper, but growing steadily louder. It was a tune I recognized. "Take It Easy" by the Eagles. The sound filled the car, bright and familiar, chasing away the eerie silence. Take it easy. I glanced at the GPS, and for the first time in hours, it displayed a clear map, complete with street names and upcoming exits. "Continue on the route," it said, its voice alive and human again. The highway looked different now. The fields seemed brighter, the horizon less oppressive. A truck passed me going the opposite direction, its headlights cutting through the evening gloom. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone anymore. I rolled down the window, letting the cool air rush in, and laughed. A shaky, bewildered laugh that felt like a release. When I reached the next town, its lights sparkling like tiny beacons, I pulled into a diner parking lot and sat there for a moment, catching my breath. The world had returned to normal, but the memory of that endless highway lingered. I didn't know what happened out there. Was it a glitch in reality, or just my mind playing tricks? But I knew one thing for sure. I would follow the route. Story number 3, the day trade. 6 months. That's how long I've been calling myself a day trader. The first few weeks I told anyone who'd listen. Friends, family, the guy at the coffee shop who never remembered my name. But these days, I avoid the topic altogether. Too much explaining, and most of the time it boils down to, no, I haven't hit it big. No, I'm not bankrupt. Yet. The truth is, I'm bleeding money. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Small losses adding up until my account balance looks like it's been through a paper shredder. I'd stop if I weren't so stubborn, so desperate to prove I could make it work. But today feels different. Today feels like the end. My first trade of the morning was Tesla. Always Tesla. It's like a siren song, unpredictable, volatile, and absolutely indifferent to my plans. I bought calls, thinking I'd catch a breakout. Instead, the stock plummeted faster than my coffee got cold. I sold at a loss, my hand shaking as I watched the little red numbers carve into my account like a blade. The second trade wasn't much better. Amazon, puts this time. It was climbing steadily, too steadily, and I figured it couldn't last. Spoiler, it did. Another loss, a bigger one. By the third trade, I wasn't even thinking straight. It was just something obscure, some biotech company with a ticker I barely recognized. I bought it, hoping for a miracle, a Hail Mary. What I got was a steady march down to zero. By lunchtime, I was down another $1,200, and I could feel it, the dark pit of failure opening under my feet. That's when I started going to Indeed and looking at factory jobs. My criminal record made retail and office work tricky. It was long ago in the past, and the factory gigs, they didn't really care, as long as you showed up. I hated the idea, but it beat watching my bank account bleed out. Then I saw it, the magic 8-ball, tucked into the corner of my desk, half buried under a stack of unpaid bills. It had been a joke gift from my brother, a reminder, he said, to let the universe handle things. I hadn't touched it in years, but now something about it felt significant. I picked it up, the plastic cool against my palm. Should I make another trade? I asked, half laughing at myself as I gave it a shake. The triangular message floated up on its murky little window. Ask again later. I snorted. Yeah, sounds about right. But I couldn't let it go. There was something almost hypnotic about the thing. The way it seemed to whisper possibilities just out of reach. Is it a good idea to keep trading? I asked, shaking it again. Yes. I stared at the answer, my heart doing this stupid, hopeful little jump. Fine, I muttered. One more. I went back to the charts, scanning for anything that looked even remotely promising. Apple was consolidating, the candles coiling like a spring. I opened the options chain and hovered over the $190 calls. Should I buy Apple? I asked the 8-ball, giving it another shake. Without a doubt. So I did it. I bought 5 contracts, my pulse quickening as I hit the button. The chart moved slowly at first, inching upward. Then suddenly it took off, a sharp spike that sent the value of my contract soaring. My heart pounded. For the first time in weeks, I was winning. I sold for a 310% profit, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Okay," I said, gripping the 8-ball tighter. "Was that just dumb luck?" I shook it again. "Don't count on it." The rest of the afternoon was a blur. Every trade, every decision, I asked the 8-ball first. It wasn't always right, but it was right enough. By the time the market closed, I recouped all my losses from the morning and then some. My account was up $4,000. I hadn't seen a number like that since I started, but something about it felt off. The trades weren't just lucky, they were uncanny. The charts moved in ways that felt too perfect, too clean. And the 8-ball? Its answers felt sharper, more deliberate, as if it wasn't just random, as if it knew. That night I couldn't sleep. The 8-ball sat on my desk like a sentry, its glossy surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I kept thinking about the way the charts had glitched once during a trade, and just for a second, how the room had felt different, heavier. By morning I was back at my desk, the 8-ball in hand. "Should I trade today?" I asked it, my voice shaky. "Signs point to yes." So I traded, and I won. Over and over, like the market was bending to the whims of a cheap plastic toy. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. But by the third day, the fear started to outweigh the thrill. The glitches were happening more often. Small flashes on the screen, numbers flickering before snapping back into place. The apartment felt dense, charged, electric. Even Daisy, the dog I was sitting, wouldn't come near the desk. She stayed at the door, her ears pricked, her tail tucked. This morning, as I stared at the 8-ball, I realized I didn't know how to stop. "8-ball, should I be asking you for financial advice?" I shook the ball, harder, harder, harder. I looked at the triangular square, starting to come into focus. My hands were sweaty. They dropped the ball, where it shattered on the floor. I never day traded again. Story number 4. The cat that didn't come back. It all started with the cat, or rather the cat that wasn't. I pride myself on noticing details most people overlook. A shifted shadow, an out-of-place sound. These things don't escape me. So when I saw Dmitri lounging on the windowsill, tail flicking in the morning sunlight, I didn't think much of it. He's my Russian blue. Lean, sleek, with fur like a storm cloud and piercing green eyes. I know him inside and out, every quirk and habit. But that morning, something wasn't right. For one, he seemed smaller, just slightly. Not enough that anyone would notice, but I did. His frame, while still elegant, looked just a little bit less substantial. His usual air of lazy confidence was replaced with a strange stillness. When I greeted him, "Morning, Dmitri," he didn't chirp back like he always did. He just sat there, staring out the window. I shrugged it off. Maybe he was in a mood. Cats are finicky like that. But the feeling gnawed at me as the day went on. Little things started adding up. Dmitri loves food. The sound of a can opening would usually summon him in seconds. That day, though, he didn't come. I even waved his favorite treat under his nose, but he just turned his head away. Dmitri has never, ever ignored treats. It was more than that. His movements were wrong. Not the lazy, fluid grace of my cat, but stiffer, more deliberate. He didn't paw at the blanket when I sat down, a ritual he performed every time. And when I picked him up, a move Dmitri usually protests with dramatic yowls and flying claws, This cat barely moved. He hung limp in my arms, and when I picked him up, a move Dmitri usually enjoyed, this cat seemed indifferent. He hung limp in my arms, his green eyes meeting mine. They were Dmitri's eyes, yet they weren't. They lacked that spark, that depth of familiarity. "What's wrong with you?" I whispered. The cat blinked, slow and measured, and for a moment I felt the strangest sense of dread, as though I were looking at something not meant to be seen. I set him down and stepped back, suddenly uneasy in my own home. By evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that the cat wasn't Dmitri. The logical part of my brain pushed back. "Of course it's Dmitri," I said. "Who else could it be?" Yet my instincts screamed otherwise. His frame, his mannerisms, even the texture of his fur felt subtly wrong, like someone had tried to create a perfect replica but didn't have the full blueprint. I decided to test him. I grabbed the treat box and shook it loudly. Normally, Dmitri would come running quickly, chirping impatiently. This time he just sat there, watching me with unnerving stillness. I offered him a treat directly, holding it close to his nose. He sniffed it, but didn't eat. My heart sank. Who or what was this cat? I grabbed my keys and left the apartment. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to escape. The air outside was tepid, the world around me unfamiliar in a way I couldn't explain. Streetlights flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows. People passed by, their faces blank and expressionless, as though they were actors in a poorly rehearsed play. My mind raced with possibilities, glitches in the matrix, parallel universes, simulation malfunctions. None of them seemed crazier than the idea that the cat in my apartment wasn't my cat. When I finally returned home, hours later, the strange cat was gone. In its place, Dmitri lay curled on the couch, his sleek body and piercing green eyes unmistakably his. Relief washed over me as he chirped his usual greeting, bounding over to rub against my legs. But as I petted him, a question lingered in the back of my mind. Where had the other cat gone? The unease didn't fully fade. Days passed, and Dmitri seemed his normal self again, playful, aloof, endlessly curious. Yet the sense of wrongness lingered. One evening, as I stood at the window watching the fading light, movement caught my eye. At the edge of the woods behind my building, a flicker of gray darted between the trees. It was quick. The strange cat. I froze, my breath hitching as I stared at the spot where it had disappeared. The woods stretched on endlessly, shadowed and silent. For a long moment I considered going after it, but the thought of stepping into the darkness, chasing after that flickering form, sent a shiver through me. The other cat, smaller, wrong, an echo of Dmitri, was still out there. Story number 5. The Gig. I slung my fiddle case over my shoulder and stepped out into the evening. It was a crisp spring night, the kind that carried the scent of damp earth and budding trees. The walk from Myers Park to the pub was familiar, my weekly pilgrimage to music and camaraderie. The fiddle was an easy companion, light and portable. I often felt the pang of gratitude that I didn't have to lug around a drum kit or an amp the size of a small refrigerator. Fiddle players had it made in that regard. Myers Park was quiet, unusually so. Normally, the evening hummed with life, laughter from passerby, the occasional shout from kids playing tag, and a low murmur of traffic weaving its way through St. Paul. But tonight, it was as if someone had draped a blanket over the world. No panhandlers at their usual spots by the corner. No cars zipping by. The silence pressed against me, heavy and strange. When I reached the alley behind the pub, I spotted a black cat perched on a garbage can. its sleek form illuminated by the dim light of a street lamp. It stared at me, unblinking, its eyes glinting like tiny mirrors. "Hey there, little one," I murmured, but the cat didn't move, just watched. I shivered and made my way inside. The pub was always a comforting sight. Warm lights, worn wooden tables, the smell of beer and fried food hanging in the air. But stepping in that night felt like walking into another world. The regulars were all there, their familiar faces greeting me as they always did. Yet something was undeniably different. Their clothes caught my eye first. Waistcoats, dresses with high collars, hats that looked like they'd been plucked straight from an old photograph. It was as if they'd raided the costume department of a historical drama. I went up on stage, exchanging nods with the band. We were a ragtag crew, brought together by a love of music and the serendipity of shared schedules. I'd played with them dozens of times, and we knew each other's rhythms. The way Danny's guitar led us like a steady heartbeat, how Karen's banjo added a bright, playful energy, and my fiddle danced around them like a thread, weaving it all together. But tonight, even the band felt strange. Their movements were stiff, their eyes distant. When they spoke, their voices seemed hollow, as if coming from far away. The first request came almost immediately. "Sweet Georgia Brown!" A man called out, his voice cheerful but clipped, like an announcer from a bygone era. I blinked. That wasn't unusual in itself. People loved the classics. But as the night went on, the requests became more peculiar. Old Folks at Home by Stephen Foster. Turkey in the Straw. She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain. Not a single modern tune, no Johnny Cash, no Bob Dylan, no Beatles. Not even Devil Went Down to Georgia was requested, a crowd favorite. Instead, it was as if the pub had been transported to another time, and the songs they wanted were the soundtrack. As we played, I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness. The regulars danced and drank, their laughter echoing in the air. But there was odd deliberateness to their movements. They weren't raucous and rowdy like usual. They were subdued, almost formal. I glanced at Karen, whose banjo twanged perfectly in time, but her face was pale and tight, her eyes locked on the strings as if she didn't dare look up. Danny wasn't his usual lively self either. But he played with precision. But no soul, like a robot. Between songs, I scanned the crowd, searching for some explanation. Was this a theme night? A prank? But there were no winks, no sly grins. Just those old-fashioned clothes and faraway smiles. A woman in a bonnet caught my eye and raised her glass to me. "Wonderful playing tonight," she said, her voice lilting and musical. I nodded, managing a weak smile. But her words lingered. She spoke as if we were in a Victorian parlor, not a St. Paul pub. When we took a break, I stepped outside, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The alley was quiet except for the black cat, still perched on the garbage can. It watched me again, its tail curling like a question mark. "What's going on tonight?" I asked aloud, the words tumbling up before I could stop them. The cat tilted its head, as if considering an answer, and then leapt down and vanished into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence. Normally the alley buzzed with the sound of cars, the occasional shout from a passerby, or the distant hum of music spilling from the pub. But tonight there was nothing. Just the soft rustle of leaves and the distant creak of a swinging sign. I stepped back inside, the quiet following me like a shadow. The second set was much the same as the first. Old songs, stiff movements, distant gazes. But the energy in the room had shifted. The air felt heavier, as if the pub itself was pressing down on us. I played on, my bow gliding over the strings, but my heart wasn't in it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an intruder in some strange dream. When the final note rang out, the regulars clapped politely, their faces glowing in the dim light. I packed up quickly, eager to leave. As I stepped outside, The alley greeted me with its familiar darkness. The black cat was gone, and the street beyond was empty. Silent. I walked towards Myers Park, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. The stillness followed me, wrapping around me like a cloak. I reached the park and paused, staring at the quiet trees and the empty paths. The world felt suspended, as if holding its breath. For a moment I wondered if I imagined it all, the clothes, the songs, the oddness of the band. But the memory was too vivid, too sharp. I turned toward home, the fiddle case on my back feeling heavier than usual. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night wasn't done with me. The silence pressed closer, and I thought of the cat. Its unblinking eyes seemed to hold secrets I couldn't understand. The world felt different, like I'd stepped into another time or crossed into a place I didn't belong. When finally I reached home, I sat with my fiddle, the strings silent under my fingers. The night had left its mark, and I knew I'd carry it with me. An unsolved mystery etched into the melodies of my playing. Well, that wraps up tonight's collection of Glitch in the Matrix stories. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, night-night.